You have a good instinct almost every single day. Raise your hand, make the call, get out of bed the moment the alarm goes off. And almost every single day, some quieter, more cautious part of your brain steps in within seconds and talks you out of it. Usually so smoothly, you barely notice the negotiation happening at all. By the time you've noticed the hesitation, the moment's already gone. One woman, stuck in her own life at what felt like rock bottom, discovered a strange, almost too simple trick for closing that gap, and it ended up reshaping how she approached every hard moment afterward. That woman is Mel Robbins, and the book is The 5-Second Rule. Robbins wrote it during a genuinely difficult period in her own life, facing financial strain, a marriage under real pressure, and a habit of hitting snooze every single morning instead of getting up to actually face any of it. The turning point, by her own account, came from watching a rocket launch countdown on television. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And something about that specific structure clicked. The next morning, when the alarm went off and her body did what it always did, reaching instinctively for the snooze button, she counted backward from 5 instead and forced herself to physically stand up the instant the countdown hit 1. It worked, not because the counting itself held any special power, but because it interrupted the automatic pattern for just long enough to let a different choice actually happen. That small, almost accidental discovery became the entire premise of the book. When you feel an instinct to act on something that moves you toward a goal, count backward 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and physically move the moment you hit 1 before your brain has time to talk you out of it. Robbins is specific that this isn't meant as a general motivational slogan. It's meant as a physical interruption, deliberately timed, that inserts itself into the narrow gap between an instinct arising and your mind's default response of hesitation, doubt, or excuse-making. The reasoning behind why this actually works is where the book gets more specific, and it centers on a claim about how quickly hesitation forms once an instinct appears. Robbins argues that in the moments immediately following a genuine impulse to act, whether that's raising your hand to speak, standing up to introduce yourself to a stranger, or getting out of bed for an early workout, your brain begins generating self-protective doubts almost instantly, and those doubts arrive specifically to keep you inside your current comfort zone. This isn't framed as a character flaw. It's framed as a basic feature of how the brain is wired, defaulting towards safety and the familiar unless something deliberately interrupts that default in time. The 5-second countdown is designed to occupy exactly that narrow window, giving you a physical action to perform before the hesitation has a chance to fully form and take over. This leads directly into one of the book's central, repeated claims. Hesitation is the single biggest killer of good instincts. Robbins argues that the moment you pause on an instinct, even briefly, you've essentially handed control over to the part of your mind whose entire job is talking you out of things that feel uncertain or exposed. The specific danger isn't laziness or lack of desire. It's the pause itself, because a pause creates exactly the opening. A hesitant mind needs to manufacture a plausible-sounding reason to back down. Robbins is direct that this pattern plays out identically whether the stakes are small, deciding whether to speak up in a meeting, or significant, deciding whether to finally have a difficult, overdue conversation with someone you care about. In both cases, The instinct itself was usually correct. It was the hesitation immediately afterward that quietly overrode it. Picture someone sitting in a meeting with a genuinely useful idea, feeling the instinct to raise their hand and share it. In the book's framing, that instinct arrives in a fraction of a second, immediately followed by a wave of quieter, doubting thoughts, questioning whether the idea is good enough, whether it's really their place to speak up, whether someone more senior might have already thought of it. If that pause is allowed to run its course, the moment usually passes, the meeting moves on, and the instinct evaporates entirely, having never been acted on. Robbins' argument is that counting down and physically moving, whether that's literally raising a hand or simply opening your mouth to speak, has to happen inside that first narrow window before the doubt has time to fully form and take hold. Robbins extends this idea into what she calls building a courage habit, treating the willingness to act on small, uncomfortable instincts as a skill developed through consistent, deliberate repetition, rather than a fixed trait some people simply have more of than others. Each time the countdown is used to push through a small moment of hesitation, whether it's introducing yourself to someone new, sending a difficult email, or simply getting out of bed on time, the pattern gets slightly easier to repeat the next time. This mirrors how a muscle strengthens through repeated, deliberate use. The specific instinct being acted on matters less than the consistency of interrupting hesitation itself, because the courage habit being built is less about any single outcome and more about proving to yourself repeatedly that hesitation doesn't automatically get the final say. A related and specifically emphasized application in the book is procrastination, something Robbins treats not as a character flaw, but as a predictable consequence of waiting to feel ready before starting a task. She's direct that motivation is unreliable, and waiting for it to arrive naturally before beginning something difficult is, in practice, a strategy for never beginning at all. The 5-second countdown, applied here, is meant to force the first physical action of a task, opening the document, standing up to start the workout, dialing the number, before the mind has the chance to talk you into postponing it one more time. Robbins argues that the hardest part of nearly any avoided task isn't sustaining effort once it's underway. It's overcoming the initial resistance to starting in the first place. And that resistance is exactly what the countdown is designed to interrupt. This connects to one of the book's more direct psychological claims, something Robbins states plainly. Emotions are not facts, and you do not need to feel ready or motivated in order to act. She argues that a huge amount of avoidance and procrastination comes from treating an internal feeling, like not feeling like it, as though it were a legitimate, binding reason not to proceed, when in reality it's simply a passing emotional state with no actual authority over what you're capable of doing right now. Once this distinction is genuinely internalized, the absence of motivation stops functioning as a valid excuse, because the plan was never actually dependent on motivation showing up in the first place. Robbins frames this as one of the more liberating shifts the book offers, since it removes the need to manage or manufacture a particular feeling before being allowed to act. Finally, the book applies the same 5-second interruption to something less about action and more about mental patterns, interrupting spirals of worry and anxious rumination. Robbins describes the mind's tendency to loop repeatedly over the same anxious thought once it takes hold. Each repetition reinforcing the emotional intensity of the worry without actually producing any new insight or resolution. The countdown, used here, functions as a deliberate circuit breaker, a way of consciously redirecting attention the moment a worry spiral is noticed beginning, rather than letting it run uninterrupted. This isn't presented as a way to avoid difficult emotions altogether. It's presented as a tool for regaining a small but real measure of control over attention, at the exact moment that attention would otherwise default into an unproductive, repetitive loop. Robbins extends the rule beyond one-off moments of courage into something more structural, using it deliberately as a trigger mechanism for building or breaking everyday habits. Rather than relying on willpower alone to resist a habit you're trying to change, or to start one you're trying to build, she suggests using the 5-second countdown as the specific bridge between the trigger for that habit and the actual behavior, closing the gap where the old automatic pattern would normally take over. Someone trying to stop reaching for a late-night snack out of habit rather than genuine hunger can use the countdown the moment the urge appears, physically moving toward a different action, like getting a glass of water or walking to another room, before the automatic reach for the snack has a chance to run its usual course. The mechanism is the same one used for courage, simply pointed at interrupting an unwanted pattern instead of activating a wanted one. A related idea Robbins returns to is the role of physical movement itself in actually changing your internal state, not merely expressing an already changed one. She argues that waiting to feel confident, energized, or ready before physically acting has the sequence backward. Standing up, moving forward, or physically initiating an action tends to generate the feeling of readiness afterward, rather than requiring that feeling as a prerequisite beforehand. This is part of why the countdown specifically demands physical movement, rather than simply a mental decision. A thought alone made in the abstract is far easier to reverse or abandon than a body already in motion. And Robbins treats that physical commitment as functionally more powerful than intention held only in the mind. This same mechanism, she argues, applies directly to building momentum once a difficult task or conversation has actually begun. The hardest point in almost any avoided action isn't the middle of it, but the very first instant, the reach for the phone, the first step out the door, the first word of a hard sentence. Once that first physical action has actually occurred, Robbins observes that continuing tends to require far less resistance than starting did, because the emotional barrier that made the action feel so difficult was concentrated almost entirely at the threshold, not spread evenly across the whole task. The countdown exists specifically to get a person across that single narrow threshold, on the understanding that everything after it tends to become considerably easier by comparison. Robbins also applies this directly to social courage, an area she returns to repeatedly throughout the book. Introducing yourself to a stranger at an event, approaching someone you'd like to know better, or simply speaking up in an unfamiliar group. All trigger the same instinctive hesitation the book describes elsewhere, often intensified by a fear of visible rejection or awkwardness. She argues that the specific discomfort of that instant, right before initiating social contact, tends to be far worse in anticipation than in actual experience, and that the 5-second countdown exists precisely to short-circuit the anticipatory dread long enough for the actual, usually much milder, experience to simply happen. Once again, the emphasis isn't on eliminating fear entirely. It's on refusing to let that fear's opening seconds make the decision on your behalf. Every application in this book, whether it's aimed at courage, procrastination, or anxious rumination, points back to the same underlying mechanism Robbins keeps returning to. The gap between an instinct and an action is narrow, and whatever fills that gap tends to determine the outcome. Left alone, that gap fills with hesitation, doubt, and manufactured excuses, almost automatically. Interrupted deliberately, even by something as simple as counting backward from 5, that same gap can instead be filled with actual movement, the kind that turns a fleeting instinct into something real before the mind has the chance to quietly talk you out of it. The book's real argument was never really about the number 5 itself. It was about recognizing how much of a life gets shaped, one small hesitation at a time, by instincts that were never actually followed, and about how little it sometimes takes, just enough interruption at exactly the right second, to follow one of them anyway, starting with whichever instinct is sitting in front of you right now.